was found again in the basement files of the New York Historical Records Office during renovations in the summer of 1997. The box had been damaged by water. It had a leather-bound notebook inside. It had a broken spine and sheets that were yellowing and warped. The worn-out gold-leaf title just said Ashridge Hollow. Entry record from 1979 to 1888. The notebook had 237 names of men, women, and children, most of whom were newcomers to the country. But all government records show that only 11 were ever released. The rest, no death. There are no certificates, transfer papers, or family contacts. There are only names and silence. There wasn't meant to be an Ashridge Hollow. It's not on any official list of places run by the government. There are no pictures or records of the buildings. Maps of today didn't even show where it was, in a forgotten bend of the Susquehanna River Valley, until lately. But thanks to a trail of lost papers, coded letters, and the confessions of a nun who has been dead for a long time, we now know that Ashridge Hollow was not a place that helped people get better. But it was also a trap where weak people were taken and never seen again. We're glad you're here for the first time. We find records that other people would rather keep hidden. There are dark truths that shake religion, family, and the institutions we trust the most. Click subscribe if you're strong enough to keep reading. Then tell me, have you ever heard of a church or charity that just vanished? You may have grown up near one. You might be from Northern New York or Pennsylvania. Someone may have told you about a place called Ashridge Hollow. That's not all this story is about. It's about how institutions can use kindness to control people, how faith can be used to shut up people who already don't have a voice, and how the scariest things aren't always hidden where they can be seen, but are instead carefully buried so they are out of reach. Let's start with 226 names in a notebook. No one was supposed to remember. At first, Ashridge Hollow shows up quietly in a single. The state of New York gave land to a religious nonprofit group called the Society of Sacred Renewal in 1879. The paper gave permission to use 82 acres of wooded land in Steeple County, which is known for being remote, having thick woods, and having poor soil. Most people think the grant was meant to build a temporary recovery center for immigrants who are too sick or vulnerable to go to bigger places like Buffalo or Philadelphia. Religious magazines said nice things about the society itself, being kind-hearted and strict about moral responsibility. Father Alaric Breen, the founder and a former Jesuit who was kicked out for unknown reasons, said in a rare interview that Ashridge Hollow would be a place where broken people could be spiritually cleansed and given back their honor before entering God's chosen country. But there were no building plans sent in. There was no public ceremony to mark the start of the camp. And over the next 9 years, the hollow would only show up 3 more times in government records. As a vague location for people who have been marked for review by immigration officers at coastal ports and are waiting to be admitted. People who were not sick enough to die but not strong enough to be seen lived in the hollow. Part of a letter written by Dr. Elijah Moss in 1883. Reports from the time say that at Ellis Island or Castle Garden, newcomers mostly from Hungary, Ireland, Prussia, and Sicily were quietly split up. The selection factors were not clear, being underweight or clearly showing signs of chronic fatigue, distressed or overly emotional, exhibiting suspicious spiritual beliefs. Those who were flagged were taken away from the main group and put on a different bus. A lot of them were told they were going to a recovery farm or a Christian hospice to get better. This was the last time most families heard from them. Maps that have been found show that Ashridge Hollow had 5 main houses. A main cabin where people can pray and check in, a medical wing called the Red House, 2 dorms, and 1 for women and children, 1 for men, and an outbuilding that was never officially used. The people who lived there called it the Tower, even though they had never seen a building higher than 2 stories. There were steep hills and a rough wooden palisade all around the building. Tape maps didn't show any roads that led to Ashridge Hollow. The Society's own black, unmarked, canvas-covered trucks were the only way to get to and from the camp. No reporter has ever been allowed to visit in all the years it was open. The camp. Not a single picture was taken, and only one survivor, if you can even call her that, made it out of Ashridge Hollow alive. Her name was Rosalia Feldman, and she was 14 years old. She was from Hungary, and her diary would be the first real sound to break the quiet. The Feldman family moved to Ashridge Hollow on October 14, 1881. She was 14 years old, by herself, and getting better from what the government called ship fever. She remembered the wagon ride better than the boat ride. There was a narrow seat next to her, and a woman in a hood who never spoke. The road they were on was swallowed up by the endless forest. The road turned to dirt, then stone, then nothing. The trees got taller, and the sun went down. She arrived that week with 31 other people, mostly women and children. There was an old man coughing blood into a rag, a boy missing his left hand, and a mother with twins wrapped in aprons. They were told this was a place of healing, and they were lucky. But the first thing that happened was baptism, not medical care. The water was waist-high and very cold, and each newcomer was dunked one by one while fully clothed. They weren't allowed to scream. After, my ears rang. A man whispered a prayer in a language I didn't know. I think it was Latin. Then they cut off my hair. Rosello said the dorms were clean, but too quiet. There was no laughter or crying, just the sound of wool blankets rustling and feet stomping on wood. Food came once a day, a thin broth with no meat and bread that tasted like ash. They weren't allowed to speak. Every morning started with prayer, then silent walks around the courtyard, and then instructions. The same 6 phrases were said over and over in different languages. Obedience brings wholeness. Pain removes the foreign, clean spirit, clean country. Some people tried to ask questions, but those who did were taken away. A girl named Lisbeth Rosalia wrote and asked if she could write to her uncle in Albany. She was taken to the tower, but she never came back. The tower was always locked, had no windows, and a bell that rang randomly. People went missing at 3 a.m. on those nights. Rosalia stopped asking questions after the 3rd week. She learned the prayers by heart, ate what she could, stayed small, and tried to be invisible. But she never forgot the names of the people who went missing. She wrote them into the lining of her pillow with a broken piece of charcoal. By the time she got away, there were 19 names on the list. She never said them out loud, but we still have her diary and the list is there. Page 14. The Society of Sacred Renewal was started in 1868 by All Alaric Breen, a former Jesuit priest who had been kicked out of Rome for reasons that the Vatican would not explain. The society presented itself to the public as a charitable organization that worked to restore the morals of immigrants, the sick, and the displaced. But behind closed doors, it followed a set of beliefs called the doctrine of national sanctity. According to internal records that have been found, the society believed that the moral failure of they didn't turn away immigrants. Instead, they thought that immigrants should be broken down and rebuilt before they could come to the country. In their teachings, pain was healing, silence was holy, and death wasn't the end, but a way to be useful in a holy way. You can find this phrase a lot in their writings. Those who die pure remain useful in spirit. The society's hierarchy was closed and rules were strict. The inner circle was carefully chosen and made up of 5 people, 5 clerics, 3 doctors, and 2 women only known as Sister Andura and Mother Kieran. They believed in 3 types of purity: purity of body, purity of obedience, and purity of silence. Each stage had a test. Stage 1 was a bodily trial, and survivors were allowed to join the community. Stage 2 was obedience, and people who didn't want to follow the instructions without question were put in a separate area to work on their morals. In the 3rd stage, people who failed were silenced for days or even weeks. Those who didn't follow the rules were thought to be spiritually dirty. The society never called these punishments crimes. They called them refinements. In a letter found in Albany, Father Breen wrote, "We are not cruel. We are exact. The body must be free of weakness so that the soul can make it through the crossing. Modern people don't like the way we do things, but we don't serve modern people." Ashridge Hollow was their test site, a place where poor, the forgotten, and useless could be changed or thrown away because not everyone made it through the refinements. Those who didn't were not buried. They were stored. The first cleansing chamber was under the red house. Rosalia described it as a cold, stone room with no windows that was lit by oil lamps that smoked black against the ceiling. The walls were tiled but cracked, and the floor sloped gently toward a drain. There was no chapel or altar, just water and silence. No newcomers lived there for more than 48 hours. It was said that this was the first step toward renewal, but no scriptures were read or prayers were said out loud. Instead, the initiate was stripped, put in ice water, and looked at. Rosalia wrote, "3 of them watched us through glass. They didn't move. I heard quills being scratched. They wrote while we shook." The process took 15 to 40 minutes. Some were taken back to their dorms, while others were led behind the black door at the far end of the room. Dr. Elijah Moss, a doctor who used to be part of the society, later wrote in an unsigned letter, "The cleansing was not symbolic. It gave us information. People who responded too strongly, shaking, throwing up, or screaming were thought to be biologically unstable." This phrase was written down, numbered, and saved for later use. It can be found in several old internal papers. Behind the black door was a smaller, colder, more clinical room with 2 metal tables and a row of. It was called the back room by the survivors. Rosalia never saw it, but she heard it. Every night there was a sound like wood being split and then dripping, and then the bell would ring. It wasn't the chapel bell, but a different one that sounded hollow and dead. It rang every time someone didn't come back, and every time it did, the tower lit up for a moment, with one window flickering like a lantern behind skin. After being cleansed, their bodies were marked as material relics, and instead of being thrown away, parts were preserved, fluids were extracted, organs were catalogued, and each package was marked for sanctified integration. But where they were sent wasn't clear until later. By the spring of 1882, at least 43 names had disappeared from Ashridge Hollow's intake registry. They hadn't been released or transferred. They had just been taken away. Rosilla Feldman wrote, "Some nights the beds were empty. By morning, not a sound, not a fight, just gone. At first, society said they were sick, and then they said they were acting badly. Then nothing at all in the end. There was no way for most families to ask. Letters sent to the Hollow were sent back unopened, with the message, 'No such recipient.' Word got out in Albany and Philadelphia that something was going on. Reports of family members being lost in change are quiet and confusing. Questions were sent to the customs offices, but when officials tried to look into it, they were told that Ashridge Hollow was exempt because of its holy nature, not under the control of state health boards. The disappearances kept happening. A nurse, who went by the name Clara B., kept a secret diary. In it, she wrote down that the group kept 2 sets of books. It is the holy book for people who are accepted back into society. the quiet book for people who have been turned into spiritual assets. One entry said, 2 children, 9 and 11, unmarked, sent below. Bell rang twice, logged under silent entry 14B, vials prepared for shipment. Sending. That word kept coming up in the quiet. Book. At first, it wasn't clear what it meant, but in 1883, a rural church in Maryland said that a healing miracle happened during a prayer service for children. According to the priest, the relic was the preserved heart of a European child victim. It was in a jar that was wrapped in velvet. The treasure was given to the church by a donor who was not named but was connected to the Society of Sacred Renewal, according to church records. Within months, more stories like this came out. A piece of bone that helped a Delaware girl with her fever. A thin strip of holy skin that is said to glow in a Vermont church lit by candles. In northern New Jersey, a sample of pure blood was used in a fertility clinic. It was said that each artifact came from Eastern Europe. Each one came with a fake proof of antiquity, but the dates, the packaging, and the words all pointed to Ashridge Hollow as the source. Claraby's last entry in her diary before she went missing. These pieces save souls, but I know where they come from. We cut them, they say. We find them from the lost, pray over them, and sell them to the faithful. In 1964, workers tearing down an empty rectory outside of Bingham, New York, found a locked iron cabinet hidden behind a false wall. Inside were medical instruments wrapped in oilcloth and a ledger bound in black calfskin. The first page was blank, and the second was written in Latin as corpus in sacrum, which means the body made sacred. It was Dr. Henrik Lauren's private record as chief medical officer at Ashridge Hollow. The writing was very clear and clinical, and each entry included the patient's initials, physical condition, spiritual compliance level, recommended harvest zones, preservation method, and intended relic category. For example, subject LM, female 14, compliant mild anemia, no notable resistance, says one entry. Extraction, cardiac tissue. Posterior wall right humerus segment. The method used was saline perfused alcohol soak lavender oil masking. The relic was Class B, and it was given to mothers to pray for healing. Labeled by color, Class A included bones or organs from obedient adult males that were used in prayers for leadership or strength. Class B included tissue from adolescent females that was linked to fertility healing and divine intervention. Class C included blood-based relics that were turned into holy tinctures for ritual anointing. Class D included mixed remains that were not suitable for display, but were kept for study or internal ritual use. Every 10 entries, Dr. Lauren made a note called deviation. These were failed procedures, bodies that broke down too quickly or reacted violently to preservatives. Some of them suddenly caught fire while they were soaked in alcohol, and others kept bleeding even after they were pronounced dead. One deviation said, subject refused silence, screamed during the cut. The blood did not clot. The vessel burst after the drain, gotten rid of through thermal right. Area quarantined. The last part of the ledger was called Sanctified Integration Points, and it was a shipment log with dates, contents, and destinations. Each destination was a church mission house or seminary, and each package was marked as a sacred object. On many of them, it said things like, for use in Lent ritual to be sealed beneath altar gift for bishop's consecration. The last entry was in May 1887, and was shipment number 219. It listed 5 bone fragments, 1 cardiac segment in a crystal vial, and 2 recipients, Sacred Mother Chapel, PA, St. Julius Parish versus Gay, and 2 recipients who were not named. 2 weeks later, Dr. Lauren disappeared. There was no grave, no resignation, just an empty room. As a final note, the flesh doesn't lie, but the faithful never ask. The surrounding towns stayed away because the valley was officially closed for sanitation violations. Even in the 1920s, maps still showed the valley with a simple warning that no one should go there. But the stories never stopped. Kids in Steeple County were told not to go near the tree line. Farmers said their dogs howled when the wind blew from east to west. An old man at the tavern told the same story over and over again, and the chimney still talks. In the middle of Ashridge Hollow stood the Red House, which was the intake and cleansing center. People in the area say that on some nights, especially in the fall, you could see thin lines of white smoke rising from the chimney. It wasn't thick or natural smoke. It seemed like the air itself was bleeding. And if you got close enough, you could hear something else, a sound like whispers through bone. In a 1936 letter, Hunter Elias Braddock said, "I was no more than 40 feet from the ruin when I heard it." Not wind or speech, but something in the middle, like someone reading. Teenagers dared each other to camp nearby, and some came back sick. Anna Croft, 16, woke up screaming after a night near the chimney. She said she saw children walking through the trees with their mouths stitched shut and small jars full of light. When her parents asked her what the children wanted, she said they were looking for the rest of themselves. A crew working to resurface County Route 11 asked to go around the eastern ridge instead because their machines kept breaking down. It smelled like old candles, and one man said he saw a handprint burned into the inside of his windshield. In her unpublished manuscript, Echoes from the Hollow, local historian Mary Beth Alcott collected over 60 oral histories. In one passage, she wrote, "The stories aren't consistent in detail, but they all agree on one thing. When the chimney whispers, something inside you remembers being watched, and even though the building is gone, the chimney still stands, cracked and leaning, but unbroken." Her real name was Margaret Agnes Colley, and she was born in Boston in 1852 to Irish immigrants. She joined the Society of Sacred Renewal when she was 24 years old and was sent to Ashridge Hollow in 1881, where she stayed until she died in 1907. She died there under the name Sister Agnes Benedicta, and 2 weeks after she died, the convent's caretaker. She found a sealed envelope taped to the bottom of her writing desk. Inside were 9 pages of handwritten confessions. There was no title or salutation, just the first line, "Forgive me, Lord, for I gave the blessings, and I closed my eyes." She wrote about arrival ceremonies where kids were naked and shivering. She wrote about meals that were spiked with obedience serum, a sleep-inducing mix of alcohol and herbs. She wrote about silence drills where girls under 10 were punished for talking out of turn. There were no windows or prayers in the Red Room, which was a second room deeper underground. That's where the chosen children went. I saw them go in with ribbons in their hair and come out in pieces. Sister Agnes said her job was to comfort the children and pray with them in the hour before they were taken to heaven. She held their hands, told them stories, and sang hymns while the doctors prepared the trays. "They never screamed when I was with them," she said. "Stayed," she wrote. "By that time, they were so tired." Her guilt never went away. She wrote in a thin line, "I no longer dream of heaven." They told me the sounds I heard were holy, the tower, the red window, the steam. There was a list of 23 names in it. She could only remember the first names of the children. The wristbands never had last names written on them. Sister Agnes made one request at the bottom of the last page. "Please bury what they left if anyone still cares." Behind. But by that time, no one knew where the things they left behind were. The hole had been set on fire. The files were locked up. The tower was gone. That's what they thought. Not once did they call it a sacrifice. It was known as the merger. For many years, researchers thought that the Society of Sacred Renewal did some kind of mystic work outside of the cleansing rooms and silent drills. But the full rite wasn't known until document 72B, which had been sealed and kept in the Diocese of Syracuse's records, was found. That's right. It was typed on onion skin paper in 1885 and was called Liturgy for the Holy Journey of the Flesh, titled to be used in services of integration under the apostolic exception. The text described a clear, repeatable process that could change the body of a chosen person from a burdened human vessel to a holy channel. There were 3 steps in the process. The first stage is the willing silence. The person has to stay quiet for 72 hours before the rite. Verbal pushback takes away sanctity. Tears. Okay then, screams can't be used. Stage 2. The unbinding. Cedar oil and vinegar are put on the subject's joints to make them feel better. The Book of Red Return is used to read a prayer, a piece of banned mystic preaching. During the first hour of being apart, the heart must not be touched. The third stage is the Holy Divide. The body will be split up into vessels based on their mental purpose. Blood is the right to heal. Bone is the same as base relics. Skin covers organs for baby baptism and acts as a sign of intercession for women who can't have children. Men who are going. At least 3 people had to be present for the rite to be valid: a leading priest, a medical sanitizer, and 1 witness to the breaking of the sacred. They were dressed in white. Before the rite, they didn't eat or drink for 48 hours. They were told not to use names during the process because, according to the Society's laws, the subject stopped being a person once they were picked. They turned into God's stuff. Someone had written in the edge of the page 72 a scary note that said, "If the soul is ready, the body will not rot. If the soul resists, the relic will go bad." This idea that the body would show how spiritually fit it was made sense of every deformity, foul organ, and preserved piece of childhood found in Ashridge Hollow. On the last page of the ritual it said, "When integration is complete, carefully disperse the vessels. Let no layperson suspect the origin. Let no voice break the chain of sacred silence." That chain has been in place for almost 100 years. A private gift was made secretly to the Inn 1997. Archive of Hudson Valley Folklore. There is no return address or letter with it. A child's diary bound in torn linen, a brass key engraved with the number 7, and a folded hand-drawn map with only the word map written below it were all inside the box. The writing looked like it came from one of Rosalia Feldman's known papers. But this map wasn't like the others. It showed a network below Ashridge Hollow and was drawn in charcoal on yellowed paper. The route was marked on a center corridor. There are 5 rooms, some named Soft, Bone, Red, and Choir. The last path is marked only by a cross, and the words don't bring back what was buried whole. In the bottom corner, small letters that were not lined up straight. You can't run on this. This helps you remember. The measurements on the map, including projections of elevation, were too accurate to be true. The small group of forensic historians who were told to go back to the site of Ashridge Hollow in May 1998 did so. They found the foundation stone as the Red House's stones were lying below them, right where On the map, it said that they found a locked iron door. The metal key worked. The stairs went inside, and the smell was like old wax, decay that had been salted, and something else that smelled like dried flowers and rot. The stairs went down 40 feet. At the bottom, there's a short cave made of limestone that is supported by wooden beams and 5 rooms. Behind each of the narrow stone beds in the soft room were leather straps that held the legs and arms in place. Scratched into the walls were mostly crosses, some turned upside down, and others bent into spirals. A torn hymn book lay in the corner. The bone room had 14 wooden drawers that were all labeled by number instead of name. There were pieces of femurs, felines, and jawbones inside, each soaked in lavender oil and wrapped in scripture. The red choir didn't have any furniture. The altar was made of human ribs, and candle wax had melted into a big ring on the floor. But the last room proved that the person who made the map was more than just a survivor. As proof, there was a room full of hundreds of jars with codes that matched entries in Dr. Lauren's journal. Some still held liquid, while others only had dust. Every one of them had a piece of parchment sealed in wax that said, "Sanctified, awaiting dispersion." In the middle of the room, below a broken cross, there was one last message written in charcoal. They were never supposed to leave, but they couldn't stay either. In 2009, while St. Kiemer's Church in western Pennsylvania was being fixed up as usual, a sealed subfloor was found under the refuge by workers. The arrangement wasn't written down. There is no mention of it in church plans, records in the diocese, and the files. The room was only 6 feet by 6 feet. In the middle was a stone platform that had turned black over time. There is a crystal reliquary on top. Inside the reliquary was a heart that had been kept perfectly, still wet, red, and beating. Every 32 seconds it pulsed. The workers became scared. Father Delaney, the local priest, told everyone to be quiet. He said it was a miraculous sign, but one of the workers took a picture of it and posted it online. Within days, other experts had found the link. A code was written on the reliquary. This is RF23B, Rosalia Feldman. Entry number 23 in Dr. Lawrence's ledger. A Class B teen girl with light anemia who was willing to comply. Her heart had never been shipped as a relic. It had been buried under the altar and hidden for more than 120 years by the Eucharist. The heart did not show any signs of decomposition, formaldehyde, or synthetic preservation when it was studied. Instead, it only had small amounts of lavender oil and human saline. The church put out a message. We don't talk about magical artifacts that can't be proven, but the heart was secretly taken from the. Rosalia's body was moved, sealed, and made public record, but she was never buried. Investigators found a piece of a notebook stitched into the lining of an old missal in the same compartment that was hidden behind the pedestal. It was a final note, and Rosalia's handwriting was proven to match what she had written before. I wasn't picked because I was good. I was picked because I was quiet. Tell them I'm not an old thing. I was a girl. People who lived through Ashridge Hollow talked about the light for decades. A flash and a pulse in a window that are high above the rest of the property. That was never opened. The tower. It was made of brick and black iron and had 6 floors. There was no way to get in from the ground floor. The plans didn't show a ladder there. The Society's public works didn't talk about it, but every few nights the red window would light up for a moment or two. A lot of people, including Rosalia, called it the Eye. In 1924, a reporter named Samuel Greaves talked to people who used to work on the cleaning crew in Ashridge Hollow, among. We were told to never look up, a grave digger named Theo Cooch remembered, but once I saw a girl with pale hair, like wet thread, standing behind the red glass. She didn't blink, she didn't move, she just watched. When investigators went back to the site in 1998, part of the tower had fallen, but the iron stairs inside were still there, narrow, rusted, and spiraling up into the darkness. The 6th floor was locked until they forced it open. Inside, there was a single room that was round, but there was no bed or anything else. No furniture, just a chair bolted to the floor and leather restraints at the wrists, ankles, and neck. The walls were carved in dozens of languages, including Hebrew, Latin, Greek, and broken Romanian. The phrase, "the saint must stay whole," was written over and over again. In the middle of the room stood a 7-ton glass cylinder connected to a series of dried tubes. Inside it was the outline of a child's skeleton carefully set up in an upright position, surrounded by dried wax and fabric strips with. In the corner, they found something even worse, a journal. It was written in an adult hand that was shaking, but it was signed with a name that none of them thought it would be, R.F. Rosalia Feldman. This was the last entry. They took my name and voice, but they couldn't take the piece that waited. This meant the part that watched and waited for the door to open. One sentence was scratched deeper than the others, as if she wrote it over and over until the pen tore through the paper. I was never. Workers in Trenton, New Jersey in 2016 took down an old Eastern Dassey storage warehouse and found a sealed crawl space under the foundation. Inside, they found 3 things: a worn-out wooden crate with the number SSR final number 0049 written on it, a bundle of shipping manifests tied together with red string, and a smaller locked box that was burned black on one side. The manifests were from April 1887, just a few weeks before Ashridge Hollow closed down, and they listed 48 shipments that were all found in church relics. Registries from Vermont to Georgia, but the 49th entry was different. There was no recipient named, no relic category, and only one line that said, RF integration complete. This line was set aside for internal containment, and hold was written next to it in faded red ink. Do not give out. The box was rusted shut, and when it was opened, it had a reliquary frame made for upright suspension, torn linen with the words Sancta Expectet, the Holy One waits, and a small leather pouch full of red-stained glass shards. But it was the locked box that caught people's attention. It didn't have any writing on it. Instead, a hand-carved emblem of an eye and a tower was burned into the lid. Inside was a wax cylinder that said, Integration Hymn, Original Voice, and below it was a single finger bone that was perfectly preserved and the right size and shape for a girl about 12 to 14 years old. The scariest thing that was found was a note written in fine, spidery script and taped to the inside of the box lid. The last part of the soul never left. It waits for the voice to come back. There were no other records of Shipment 49 in the church archives. No one ever claimed it or received it, but for more than 100 years it stayed sealed under the floor of a warehouse that no one remembered building. Her name was Rosalia Feldman. She was born near Albany in 1874 and came to Ashridge Hollow when she was 11 years old. She was quiet and obeyed, and she never left. For more than 100 years, she was listed as A. As a relic Class B healing intercessor, her body was cut up into pieces, her voice was preserved off-key, her heart was buried under an altar, and her bones were broken up, catalogued, and used for other things. But her words lived on in charcoal, ink, on stone, in stained linen through her maps, journals, and silence. And in that silence she said more than the men who tried to make her holy. Many people didn't believe it because it seemed too organized, too holy, or too clean. But it wasn't faith that kept her memory alive. It was fear, guilt, and a girl who wouldn't go away completely. In 2021, a group of independent researchers and forensic archivists created the Ashridge Ledger Project, a public database of all recovered names, codes, relics, and ritual records from the Society of Sacred Renewal between 1890 and 1911. They confirmed that 123 children didn't have death certificates. They only had shipment tags. Some relics are still on display in small churches across the eastern U.S., but they are only marked as blessed unknown. One by one, they are being identified by handwriting, scars, birthmarks, dental patterns, and echoes, not by miracles. As for Rosalia Feldman, her heart was finally buried in a small grave on private land with no marker. The headstone just says, "I was not a relic. I was a girl." There was no rising, no saint, no holy glow. There was just a child who was taken and who was broken and who left a way for herself to get back to the truth.